All right, here we go. It is podcasting time, and it is time for PowerWorks with Glenn Power from PowerWorks Automotive. We're talking cars. Coming to you from the Rove Hotel downtown Dubai's Epic Podcast Studio. Glenn, it's good to see you.
Good to be back. In a couple of weeks.
It's been a couple of weeks, and
Yeah.
I was saying this to everyone that I podcast with, that time just, the beauty of the podcast world is someone who's listening doesn't really get a sense that maybe there's been a pause, maybe there's been some time out, maybe I've gotten busy, and because they just kind of come out, one or two every week, and away we go. But we've been on pause.
Yeah, we've been on pause, yeah. Well, we've not been on pause. The podcast's been on pause.
Yeah, the recording has been on pause.
We've just been busy, but yeah.
And I miss it. I always miss it when I'm not, doing this.
Yeah, it gets like 11:30 on a Tuesday morning if we don't do one, and it's like, EJ will come in and say, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well,
just the way it is. You get used to your routine. Everything we do is a routine.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, and then, we do record typically on a Tuesday. So they're all racked in on a Tuesday. And typically before you is Dr. Jenna. Unfortunately, Dr. Jenna couldn't be here today. Oh, no, she could be here. The time didn't work for me because I've got my, I'm really flexible. It's funny.
Yeah.
I said to someone the other day, today actually, I was sending some an appointment for something. I said, I'm really flexible. And then I sent them all the stipulations on the times when I could get together. And it was like, I wrote by there, I'm really not that flexible.
Yeah.
And they were like, no, not really. It's like,
really
you're
flexible.
you're flexible within a 4-hour period, 5 days a week. But anything outside those 4 hours and outside those days,
Yeah. No
forget
chance.
it. Yeah. Like, after can we meet at 4? And yeah, it ain't going to happen.
Oh. Privily is not free. You're going to get your use out of privily.
That's what I said. I said, come on, like I've got a reputation to uphold here.
Yeah. So, no, but there's always stuff going on. You just have to. It's when we don't do it, I sometimes think, I wouldn't have had time for it today. In fact, every time I think, it's a good job because I wouldn't have had time today. But it's always good to make the time. And we've just come off of a effectively long weekend. Though that's not really nice way to term
It's
it.
a period of mourning. So we're dating ourselves here. His Highness Sheikh Khalifa passed away, peace be upon him. And we had a long weekend of a mourning period. So everything was closed.
Friday afternoon, I got a call from the PRO, but I'd heard about it. Bad news travels fast, and Amy had called me because the radio was playing classical music, as it does here, and all the internet was awash with stories of it. So I got a call from the PRO just to say, look, guys, you need to close the doors. We've got to stop now. You've got to stop trading and send everybody home. So that was interesting, having to call so many customers and say to them, look, we're closing. As of now, it's 3 days, so we should be open Monday. But then by the time Friday evening came around, it was, no. We started on Saturdays for 3 days, so it'll actually be Tuesday. So it was difficult, trying to manage that.
Now, what was the reaction of folks? Were they, I need my car? Or people understand, right?
Everybody needs their car, but there's very little we could do.
Yeah. So do people want to come and get their car and then drive it in various states of disrepair? Or
we didn't have anybody at all.
Okay.
There was a few,
I guess people understand,
awkward conversations and what have you. But,
what can they do? Everyone's closed.
The worst one, there was 2 vehicles that had been in all week for quite major jobs that could have gone. And we just couldn't do the finishing touches on them, and it wasn't worth the risk of sending them out. It wasn't a matter of they needed a wash and a vacuum. It was a matter of a road test and make sure they're okay in QC, and it's not worth sending them out without that.
Just as a really good question, and I do want to talk right off the top, what's new in the garage, what's going on. But I want to talk about the quality control road test portion of a repair, because so many people, when you say, look, we just got to take it out for road tests. Don't worry. I trust your work. It's going to be okay. What percentage of the time do you think you take a vehicle out for that road test and you bring it back and you go, whoa, hold on. There's either something new or, okay, let's just recheck that brake caliper again.
Well, we'd have to break it. So we try to, so if you were to bring the car in and say it needs a service, but I'm hearing this noise from the back, we try to get it that myself or DJ or the service advisor will go with you before you leave the car, just so we can hear what you're hearing. Because as a technician, we'll hear something completely different. You drive the car every single day.
You drive it. You not only hear it, you feel it.
So you'll maybe have a wheel bearing that's been slowly getting worse and worse and worse over the last 20,000 kilometers that you've not noticed how bad it is. We get in the car and all we can hear is because the wheel bearing's gone. But you don't hear that as a daily driver of the car. You can hear this annoying little rattle or this squeak or whatever it is in the back, which we can't get past the bearing noise because it's like,
yeah, this car's gonna be in the corner here.
So we have that problem. So we always try to go with the customer. It's not always possible. We do a lot of collection and delivery for cars, so we'll pick them up.
Which I like, I gotta say.
Yeah, which we have to do. People are busy these days, right? So we have to do it. So we don't always have that possibility. So in those situations where we haven't driven the car, we'll try to drive the car before the service. So, for example, if we are to do a service on a vehicle and it has a metal underbody cover, some of the Range Rovers, most convertibles, they'll have a metal underbody cover to increase the rigidity. If we take that off to then be able to drain the engine oil, to change the oil filter, et cetera, and to do the inspection, and then when we put that back on and we go out and drive the vehicle, if there's a noise, a knocking noise or something that could be suspension, you're always going to have it in your head, was that there before, or has the technician not tightened the bolts properly on the underbody cover? So we try to drive the cars before we touch them.
Okay.
Now,
and do you make notes at that point?
Yeah,
put them into the service dossier.
To the job card.
Okay.
Now, obviously, if the car comes with a coolant leak, a fuel leak, a major oil leak, a severe engine noise, an oil pressure warning light, a coolant light, these sort of things, we can't drive it because we don't want to risk it. So again, that's the category of we've done the job and then we drive it. So car comes in for a service, we do the service, then we road test the car. The road test is part of the service because you're inspecting the vehicle like on the road doing what it should do. You can't get the full understanding and appreciation of how a vehicle is operating just by looking at it on a ramp. So massive part of the service is driving it, but we're driving it as part of the service. We're also driving it to make sure that what we've done hasn't had any negative effect or that there's nothing we've missed. So we have two road tests. So we have a service road test, which is part of the service. And then when everything's done and any extra work that may have been found and has been either approved or not approved, the vehicle will then go for a QC. And then the QC has a basic list of checking that the work that was requested has been done properly. Other basic things like lights, levels, tyre pressures, child seats, making sure that if we've had to remove them, we've left them loose and upside down, making sure that there aren't dirty fingerprints anywhere, making sure the car's clean, and if it hasn't been cleaned, it's put for cleaning. And then the last thing on the service sheet is, on the QC sheet, is final road test. So that road test is there to make sure that, again, you could wash the car and you might blow a door seal off. Door seals don't do very well here because of the heat. So you go down the road in it and it's like, well, I drove this an hour ago and there was no wind noise and now there's a wind noise. Or I drove this and now there's water sloshing around in the footsteps. These things happen all the time and you don't want that to happen to a customer because whilst it's a genuine mistake and a just bad luck and coincidence, it doesn't matter. The car was in our custody and we need to make sure it goes out better than it came in. So that's what we try to do. And the road test is something you can't be taught. You can never teach anyone to do a road test. You will just pick it up. You'll just get used to it. And the best example to give somebody that's never really done a road test on it as a service is drive a car that's your own for 6 years, 7 years, however many years, and you get used to everything in there, and then you go and get a new car, or you go and get a friend's car for a weekend, or you hire a car when you go on holiday. You notice everything that's different on it.
Yeah.
We have that 25, 30 times a week in the types of different cars that we see. And it's very hard to see. I mean, when I was at VW, I had to do a driving assessment. So I joined as an apprentice, but I had a driving license, which was relatively unusual because most apprentices join at 16, but I joined at 18. Relatively unusual, not unheard of. But because I had a driving license, well, that was a massive thing. We were not a massive place, but we had a lot of customers and we had a huge new car operation. So we'd have a massive compound where it was a 5 or 6 minute drive sometimes with a car to get into the garage. So for a technician to not have to do that on his efficiencies, send the apprentice. It's raining, send the apprentice, you know, send the apprentice. And the salespeople never put the keys on the right location. So the amount of times you get there with the wrong key. So send the apprentice. So I had to do very, very early on, I barely got my foot in the door, was a driving assessment with my mentor, as you'd call him, Graham, and he took me out and he tore me a new one because I was single hand turning the wheel.
Oh yeah, you were driving rodeo.
Absolutely tore me a new one. And I was like, I'm sorry. And he's like, you've only been driving 18 months, if that. You can't have these bad habits. That's ridiculous. How are you getting any feel from the steering column? How can you? And I was like, but it's right.
Yeah.
So driving home, you can drive with one hand there, one hand on the gear lever. But driving on a road test, you've got 2 hands at the 10 and 2 position on the wheel. You're making sure you're getting the maximum contact with the car. You're feeling how the seat is. Is the seat loose on the runners? Does it adjust properly? Does the steering wheel turn properly? Pajero's a good example. When we do the service and we lift the vehicle up, we check around it, put it back down. We're cleaning inside the car. We're doing everything else. We've done nothing to the steering. The customer picks the car up. They turn the wheel and it squeaks. There's a rubber body seal on the bulkhead that the steering column goes through. And with whatever we're doing, blowing air, vacuuming, cleaning inside, they get dust on them and they squeak and they tear and they twist and it makes a horrible noise and it sounds like something's loose on the car. Just needs a bit of a clean. But these sort of things you don't pick up if you don't check them on the road. And these are, it's surprising how much business a road test generates. Like you pick up on things from driving the car that you can then explain to the customer and save them a problem, but also generate income for the company. But B, and more importantly, how many problems it puts an end to before the customer takes it and is like, oh, we had a Cayenne in last week and the front end was fully down. The air suspension had completely collapsed on the front left. So the vehicle came in, we couldn't drive it because it was touching, the wheel was touching inside the wheel arch. So when we fix the air suspension component, we fill it with nitrogen. That's a whole story in itself. And then we drive the car and I press the brake at the end of the warehouse run and it knocks. And it's so obvious what it is. We hear it all the time. It's the upper suspension arms. So then I'm thinking, right, it's been hung on our lift. I hope this noise was there before, because that's another thing.
Yeah.
When you free the wheels on the suspension on the lift, cars don't operate like that. Cars never have their wheels free, but we can't check wheel bearings. We can't check steering play without having the wheels free.
Right.
And sometimes vehicles will be put down after a service and then a noise will be there that wasn't there before.
That's horrible.
It's part of the job, and you have to pick it up and explain and try to educate where possible the customer. But thankfully, the customer said, yeah, there was a noise. I was wondering about that, but I really need my car. So we'll get it booked in later. So yeah, these road tests are really critical, and you just have to do them and do them and do them and do them and do them. And to be honest, you'll learn more from driving with a customer and them explaining what they can hear and you tuning into that and understanding how they've come about hearing it than you would sitting with a mechanic who's trying to teach you how to do a road test, because everybody does them different. Everybody drives differently. And it's very, very important to just absorb as much as you can from the person whose vehicle that is, because they might not want the dash rattle fixing, you know.
Yeah.
We were hot on dash rattles at VW. I hate them. I really hate them. I can't stand a car with a dash rattle. I've got to fix it. I'll stop the car at the side of the road and try and fix it. But the customer doesn't care.
Yeah, it's like, I don't mind. I play the stereo so loud anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Jaguar's always rattled. Who cares? But
it's an old car.
He really wants that noise sorting at the back that maybe I've not heard because I'm tuned into something that I'm looking for. So, yeah, you'll learn more from driving with the customer often than you would from a mechanic.
What else is going on in the shop? What do you got in that's interesting? Or is it
interesting?
Let me rephrase that. Talking to Colin, he was saying, "Look, it's that time of year. We got our AC guys are going crazy, and we got these three things are the core jobs right now." Are you finding you got your seasonal stuff back in as well? And
yeah, the AC stuff's gone silly again. We finished an evaporator on a Kia Mojave on Thursday, and then Friday morning we had a Chevy Spark dropped off. Same deal, evaporator leaking. And that's just going to be the way it is now till September.
Yeah. Dashboards come out,
yeah,
evaporators pulled out, new ones put in.
You know, we've talked about these before. You always worry about the plastics breaking when you take them apart. It's just a matter of explaining the risks to the customer.
Yeah.
You know, I think most people will take a bit of a crack that we can then subsequently repair than sweating in their car for 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's undrivable without AC here. You can't drive the vehicles without AC.
It's getting there.
Especially if you wear, for example, if you wear formal attire for work.
You're wearing a suit.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
Absolute disaster. So, you know, that's just one of the usual typical things. We're getting a lot of people now, because I think people are keeping cars longer. We're doing quite a lot of upgrades. So infotainment stuff, you know, Apple Play.
Okay. Putting new stuff in.
Android Play, cameras, front and rear view. And technology is relatively cheap.
Yeah.
People are keeping their car and thinking, you know what? I'll just spend a bit on this. We've got a dashboard out of a Cayenne that we're recovering in leather, and we've got the same car we're doing the front seats. You know, these things are actually a little bit more common now.
Yeah.
So that's something that I would say is, in my 10 years here, when I first came here, we were doing them all the time. People were spending money. People had a bit of money, and everything was really vibrant after the 2008 disaster. But now, over the last 5 years, that kind of died, particularly the last 2. But no one can go and buy a car anywhere. No one wants to risk buying a car anywhere.
Well, my mother-in-law's buying a car back in Canada, 4-month waiting list.
Crazy.
And she's that classic person. She's got a lease. She's got a leased vehicle right now. She's going to buy one outright at this point because it's just not economical with the mileage, with the leased item that she's got, or the lease plan. And I think the dealer wants to get her leased car in so that they can get some used product that's pretty well nice and easy driven. And they're looking at, 4 months to be able to replace that vehicle. And that's, a big North American market.
Mad.
I'm thinking, really? Like, you have no vehicles on the lot? Nope.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about it, right? I mean, it's crazy, but it's, like I say, it means people are caring for their cars a bit more, and that's obviously good for us. Some of the jobs we don't necessarily like to do everything. There's some jobs that are just not worth, they're just not worth doing.
Yeah, some of the wiring, if you're doing some of these things and pulling stuff in and around and through, and it can be a real pain in some vehicles.
For example, if somebody comes and says, look, I want a full 360 view camera on my car, and, okay. But that means mirrors, because there's got to be a camera in the bottom of both the wing mirrors, harnesses, control units, programming, front and rear camera, new screen, because the cameras, even the cameras you buy on Amazon now and Alibaba and all these sites, they're sort of $10, $15, $20 cameras that you can buy. They're way better than what they were fitting on vehicles in the factory 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
So you've got a deal where the screens aren't capable of supporting them, so then you've got to upgrade the screen, and if you're upgrading the screen, sometimes it's not exactly the same size for the aperture in the dash, so you need the surround trims. And sometimes you just have to say, look, spending $15,000 on this car is probably not advisable.
Yeah.
It's worth maybe 30, and whilst we're at it, we've just checked, and there's a couple of thousand in brakes come in, and there's 5,000 in suspension there, and there's a bit of an oil leak, and maybe put it towards something else. But 7-8 times out of 10 we'll get on with it and do it. We had a really nice SQ5 in a couple of weeks ago, and we fitted the blind spot assist to it. The only headache with that was, this is something that, working for VW, I could not get my head round, but it's just where we are, unfortunately. The vehicle didn't have it on from the factory,
which is odd,
but that is the way it is. So on the Audi, there's a light in the mirror. So you've probably seen it on, like, the Mercedes. They have them on the actual mirror glass, and it flashes red to say there's a car in your blind spot, don't change lane.
Yeah.
On the Audi, there's just an orange signal light in the actual casing of the mirror. not on the glass. So there's a hole in the mirror cap for the cars that have it. This car didn't have it, so there's no hole there. But it's an SQ5, so it's the matte chrome mirror cap. So the customer wanted a mirror cap with blind spot assist for his car. Audi wouldn't sell him one because here they need the chassis number, and the chassis number gives them the one without the hole in it.
Yeah.
You know, I need that. But I know how ETCA, the part system, works, and I know there'll be the variations. They'll be greyed out.
Yeah.
They'll be able to see the part number variations, but they wouldn't sell him one. So he had to buy one off of another vehicle chassis number, which wasn't an SQ5, so it came matte black to be painted, and we can't get that paint. So we had to wrap it, and it wasn't quite the right colour. But you know, I think that's about a typical daily challenge, really. But that was quite an interesting one to fit. Everything was there on the car. We just had to change the door control units and put the wiring in. And
well, is that the case with a lot of these add-ons in vehicles? That the computer systems are already there. It's already all built in. They just haven't put the light on, or they just haven't turned it on.
Sometimes it's not. It is a case of it's just not switched on. Sometimes. This all started with the things like, so on a VW, you can just press your signal once and it will flash 3 times, and instead of pressing it all the way, so it doesn't correct unless you turn it off or you turn all the way the same direction. That was something called comfort signal, which you could turn on and off, and things like daytime running lights. When you parked up coming home, you could turn that on and off. But now everything, even something like a Toyota Corolla, there'll be so many things that you can turn on and off on that. Parking sensors, you know, you can switch them off permanently if you don't want them. You can change how the dashboard turns on when you turn the ignition on. You can change all sorts of parameters on the vehicle. And so for the blind spot assist on the Audi, the door control units needed to be changed because it needed to know there was a light in the mirror.
Okay.
And that control unit that was there was not okay for that. It couldn't do that. We need to run connecting wires in there for the CAN network so that it knew the system was there. We also needed to change the code so that it knew to look for the extra computer that we had to fit. But it wasn't a huge deal. You know, you're probably talking 5 or 6 hours work plus the components, and it worked, and it was original parts. It wasn't like an aftermarket part made to work okay. It was original. Yeah. And then we did the calibration, and away you go. So a lot of cars can have things turned on and off that, you know, they're region specific. Yeah. You know, and daytime running lights is the example where places like Sweden, Canada, where you have to have them on the cars.
Yeah, it's just there. And they won't let cars come in.
They've been on cars for years and years.
I can't remember when we didn't have daytime running lights.
That sort of caught on in the UK in like 2008 or something.
Yeah. And I know people, you know, I remember 20 years ago, my cousin in California said, well, what is this daytime running light thing? It's going to cost me more light bulbs and blah, blah. And I was like, are you kidding? You're driving across the prairies between Canmore and you know, Calgary, and it's a hot, bright, sunny day, and you're on that highway, and you've got your daytime running lights on. You can see the person coming up behind you at least. Whereas if the sun's blinding you, you look in your mirror, you can't see anything. So it's, you know, you're going.
Yeah, they do make sense. We had a lot of resistance to them in the UK, you know, and
I don't think any more light bulbs burned out or sucked up any more juice.
We were told by VW that we were allowed to code them off. But once we'd coded them off, if they wanted to be put back on again, that, like, for example, if it became legislation, which it was, I think it did in the end, we'd charge for it, and we'd charge a lot of money for it. And then I'm talking literally 15 minutes work, if that, to code it off. Yeah. And then no problem, we'll code them off. But when the government say it's got to be there, and on your next MOT test, it gets requested and it fails because of it, charge you £150 to put it back on.
Yeah, think twice.
Yeah, and it wasn't so much of a threat, just more of a, well, look, the system's there for you. Yeah. We have the ability to operate it. We recommend you keep it on, but we will remove it on time for you under warranty. But then when it becomes law, we will charge you to put it back. It's not our problem. They sign disclaimers to that effect because the vehicle was manufactured. They manufacture vehicles sort of in anticipation of legislation change. Yeah. You know, they're not just like, oh, they've changed the law, let's bolt this extra thing on. It does happen from time to time, but they anticipate legislation change. These people in these big manufacturers are part of government.
Exactly. They're helping to lead that legislation with safety and other things.
Yeah.
You know, it's like what's one of the big things? And I always think about, because there's always been the thought in the back of my mind, it'd be great to take the Wrangler, right? Pull a Chris Rhines, who this is, so a good friend of ours who ended up buying a Volvo from Sweden for Canada, got it shipped here so you could take it home with him. But our both of our mindsets originally were, wouldn't it be great that whatever vehicle you've got here, you drive home?
Yeah.
And so, you drive to England,
you
get it on the boat, the P&O, you take whatever what's going across now, the Queen Mary or the Queen, whatever, the Queen someone,
somebody's queen,
and you get it in the car carrier, it's on board, and you drive the car home. And you can't do it because the cars just don't work. I mean, they work, but you get there and they're going to say, well, hold on, you got 15 things safety-wise, including the glass and the lighting and your signals that are all in the wrong places. Yeah. And sorry, the bumpers. Sorry. Yeah, this car, well, I can change all those. No, you can't. No.
Yeah. Send it back. So
it's very specific. And
we've done that a few times with people taking cars to the US or Canada, and it's a minefield of,
to the point they just won't do it. You check it out and say, sorry, you cannot do it. But the car's made in that country. Yeah, but it's exported with different spec.
Yeah.
So forget it.
Yeah.
And oh well. Interesting one. I want to get your take on this because I know folks are going to be listening to this podcast and they've got the same question. Is one of the things I'm hearing a lot of on the radio, and I don't listen to a lot of the radio, so the fact that I'm hearing it a lot is
on a lot.
Is there's a lot of these get my car serviced services right now that I was listening to one recently that it seemed like a ridiculously low price. Now, look, they might have been talking about a Nissan Sunny and they didn't specify that. They've just put the lowest price into the ad. But even at that, it seemed like a ridiculously low price. And my question is, your thoughts on that as a garage where something's going to come in and get serviced, because these are like bread and butter items, right? Do you think it's a good deal? Should I be doing these things? And I know obviously this is something that you also do, but what are some of the, if there are things to be wary of with those kinds of services, what do I need to be thinking about?
One of the problems with, and it's hard to comment because I don't actually know anyone involved in any of these.
I've never used one either.
Yeah,
right?
There's a particularly sort of the most out there one, the biggest brand of them, and they've dropped 2 cars off down the road from where I live. I've seen their trucks dropping them off, and they've obviously picked them up earlier in the day. And then you see that they're charging 249 dirhams for an oil and filter change, and you think to yourself, well, there's 2 runs of recovery truck there.
Yep, I'm exactly.
I don't know that they have. I don't know that they have a facility, or whether I may be wrong, but I think they have partner garages, so they act as a bit of a broker, and they'll just use one of a couple of garages, and then they'll do the work on their behalf. They have started doing mobile servicing, so they'll come to the house and do it.
Well, I wonder about that as well,
which is another thing which I'm a little bit against, but we'll go into that maybe. Owning the business, I don't know how sustainable it is. I don't know what oil they're buying. I don't know what parts they're buying, so I can't comment on their costing. But I know what's out there cheap and nasty, and I know that it isn't good.
Yeah,
and we call it cheap and nasty for a reason. But I also know it still costs money.
Well, I'm thinking even the cheap and nasty stuff, and I've been to a few parts places in the past where I've gone in and I've said, this is what I want. And I see a product nicely branded on the counter. And I say, that price point's beautiful. And the guy looks at me and goes, no, you don't want that. And what do you mean? He said, no, you want this. And I'm going, and he gives me the wink. And I'm going, okay, I don't know why you're winking, but I'll go with the more expensive stuff. And all I can, and then I'm leaving. I'm going, oh, because that's maybe a knockoff, or maybe it's substandard quality, or. Yeah. So this becomes part of the challenge. We're not saying put the asterisks here. We're not saying that any of
Definitely
these guys are doing that,
No.
but peace of mind. So one thing to think about is peace of mind. If you're taking it to, a PowerWorks or we're not advocating, hey, I'd love everyone to go to PowerWorks, but if you're going to your neighborhood garage that you've trusted forever, you can go in and talk to. That's
the thing. And that's where I was going. That we've said from day one, the whole reason that, I want to start talking about repairing cars is that there are a lot of decent mechanics out there, and you can trust a lot of them. And people, when they find the decent mechanic they can trust, they stick with them. Guy. Yeah. Stick with the man or woman, whoever it is, that is looking after your car, because they won't get everything right every time, but they know your car and they know you. And that's very, very important. They will be able to understand what you expect from them. And as long as you accept that everybody makes mistakes from time to time, if you trust them, they'll deal with it. And I don't know how personal this service is. So I think it's very convenient, but I don't know that there's one throat to choke, if you know what I mean. I don't think there's that, I better call Glenn because my car's been there for a couple of days longer than it should have been, or they've sent me an estimate for like $6,000 and I only went in for an oil change. These sort of things, I don't know how that works. So this is one of the things, and I don't know either, because maybe I should call one and try it out. Is it essentially like going to my Quickie Lube at the service station where these guys are that's all they're doing? They're just going to drain the oil, put a new oil filter in, and... This is what I expect, and that's just from the economy of it. Like, looking at the economic side of it, I don't see, like, look, we use Total Oil. It's not the most expensive oil. It's the absolute best in terms of after sales that I've ever encountered in the country. Total is not something that I was ever exposed to at VW. I was always Castrol or Mobil. So it was a change for me, but by far the best here that I can get. And the deliveries are always on time. They're sharp. They are very well priced, and the quality is as good as anything I've ever used. So never had a problem. And I know that if I buy one drum of 0W20, it's going to cost me X amount of 1,000 dirhams. But if I buy 10, it's going to cost me less. Right. If I buy 20, it's going to cost me less. So a company such as this that might be doing 250, 300 cars a day are going to be buying huge quantities of oil. So they're going to get a lot better price than I get. They might even get the oil half the price that I pay for the same oil. That being said, they've still got to buy oil filters. Right. And, okay, you can still buy bulking oil filters, but whereas there's 3 or 4 very, very common grades of oil, there's 55, 60 different oil filters. So how many of those do they buy? Yeah. And how can they have good economy of scale there? And they've got diesel to pay for to deliver the cars and pick them up, and they've got salaries of some description now, whether that's a partner garage that they're paying them money on a retainer to for a certain amount of hours per day, whether that's they've got their own location and I've misinterpreted what I'm seeing. They've got rent and they've got salaries and they've got everything else. So I could not, without losing probably 300 dirhams, do a service on one of our VW Touareg, a car that I own. I couldn't service that car for 250 dirhams without losing probably 300 dirhams by the time you factor in time, material cost. Yeah. So we're not there. But we aren't in the quick service game. We can do a quick service if you want one, but we prefer not to. And the main important. I think this is the important point, because you can go get that quick service, like you said. You can, but for me, there's a duty of care, and we had that drummed into us from day one of being an apprentice, right the way through. And a duty of care is massively, massively important.